Hey, and welcome back to another Block Party Debrief. I am your host, solo host this week, Trevor Dykstra of the Seattle Design Festival. This week we're going to be talking to Stacey Crumbaker of Mahlum Architects. Stacey's been involved with the festival for a very long time in all sorts of levels. On the board, the planning committee, we used to have chairs. Stacey was a chair, many years, I think. But we're going to be primarily talking this week about Mahlum's block party installations over the last few years. Anyway, let's just bring her on. Hey, Stacey.
I forgot about those, like during the festival days.
Yeah, right. I know. I thought extemporaneously, oh wait, yeah, there's a whole history.
For a few minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, maybe before I share, do you want to share how you got involved with the festival while I'm getting...
Yeah. I planned a program like a year before I started doing installs with IIDA in the design and health year, and then just totally got excited about the festival and started doing installs after that. And then slowly they like draw you in deeper and deeper from planning a single install to coordinating to being on the board.
Yeah, I recall you were very like put onto immediately, like, how do we make money how do we raise money for the festival?
Pretty much. So what we call helium hand, where I'm like, oh, it's going. I just
we both have that, right? Like said yes way too many times.
Well, for a good effort.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to start in reverse. So given that the event is at the Lake Union Park now, I figured we'd start with the stuff more recent and then work backwards as we have time. So I think this is the most recent.
Yeah,
this is one, right? And this is last year.
Yep.
I'm going to turn off. So tell me about it.
So this was last year's festival, and we were really caught in this idea of how can we engage and have really wanted people to make something with us. So the idea that we would provide a framework or an armature that then things would be layered on top of, and that it would be fun, right? And so there was this idea of kind of linking back to this almost teepee. I mean, totally. I'm not going to lie. We had photos of people like teepeeing as our source of but then we wanted it more colorful. So we found these, like, they're actual rice paper that we like cut up to create colored zones. And we kept re-rolling it. Maybe that's the part that nobody tells you about when you see this install. But like we were just constantly re-rolling in order to let people keep throwing.
Yeah, to avoid burning through a million yards of paper there.
Well, and this is something that this is like, when I was working with our staff on it, right, they were so excited about it. And I was like, how many rolls of paper did you get? And they're like, oh, like 30 or something. And I was like, how small of a roll can we cut it to have, right? Because it's like, you think like rapidly, you're like, oh, you could burn through that in like 5 minutes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, you see these kids running up and then running away with it.
Pretty
That's
much
a good piece of advice right there already. It's like, if you have kind of consumable elements.
Totally. And the consumable, you like learn quickly on the consumables because you're like, oh yeah, that did. It was like within an hour, like every roll had been thrown and people were like, what do we do now? And I was like, you re-roll it.
Yeah. I think so. It was this year or the year before, somebody had paper boats. And I remember them like the first day running out to get more paper because immediately it was kind of way more than what they thought they needed.
Yeah. Especially like when you get a rush. I mean, and like we wanted something that was intuitive enough that you could see in action and then multiple people could just reiterate it, right? And we did have to the interesting part here was actually teaching the arc of the teepee throw for this one, because it's like it was to get it not to pull. But it was something like the minute people saw it, they were like, oh, I get it. Like, I know what to do here. And I think it's attractive, like young and old in this case, because like the kids just thought it was great to like even be part, like inside the streamers moving around them. And the adults were like immediately taken back to, oh, I was 13 and I definitely took a class or two in my day. Right. So, and they were like, let me show you how it's done, kids. So it had a lot of wide range, I think.
There's the arc there. Yeah. The colors make a big difference on this one too. I think like, If it were just the white, I don't think it'd be as successful as the color makes it sort of feel like, okay, this is meant to be fun. Like,
Totally. I mean, in like in our, and maybe this goes by your debrief part, like the original version of this definitely had like 3 trees, right? So we had multiple trees that were going to link together, and you rapidly identify, oh, maybe that was a little more ambitious than we were prepared for. So I think that's this check and balance. And even like the base of this one, like how heavy does the base need to be in order to not pop?
I remember that being our real concern of like, oh man, I hope like, I mean, you figure the paper's got more give than anything else, but it's just sort of like everything when you're dragging on, it's like, oh man, this better not. We thought they were going to be fabric ribbons, I think, at one point, and that was like, oh, it's going to be a whole.
And that was the original plan, and then the fabric was almost too heavy to throw. But like you can kind of tell, we worked with Leidig and CPL on this, so Leidig helped to build, and CPL has been a long-term partner with Mahlum, and they always have. It has been a good balance of being like, wait, how much do we need to add to this weight in order to make sure that we're not going to put anyone in danger? We're going to limit our liability here. Yeah, so we end up with heavy often. Thanks, CPL.
I mean, definitely when we review it, it's like, oh well, Stacey knows. I think we'll get to the one that has like welded bolts and stuff.
Yeah. And then they were actually able to even, and we tried to decommission this one too, or at least plan it for decommissioning. So Leidig a lot of this, the wood back. I think some of our team took the frames on top, and then they took the rest of the frame.
They were able to disassemble the rest. Mm-hmm. That's a good way to have just everybody's worried about second life of it and trying like we've got to find a home, or so you could just, if the material gets reused, that's valid as well,
Exactly. That was the goal for this one, at least, to try to at least find and I think some of the little the boxes, a couple of people took the boxes. It's separate from it. It's not like there's actual space. Like very few people could put this whole thing in their backyard.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, it's nice and compact.
Mm-hmm.
Any lessons learned from this one? You're like, well, I wouldn't do that again. Or I guess that's the last photo there. So before we go to the next one.
I mean, I think the biggest thing on this one was the consumer, like how quickly you go through consumables, which, we've realized. I think I got carpal tunnel from re-rolling.
I think half these photos are somebody from, right here in the middle where
we were like basically
literally re-rolling right there.
Yeah, like you keep like if you hunt out, you can see all the Mahlum people just constantly re-rolling. Yeah. But it works.
And then, go ahead. What are you going to say?
No, that's okay. Yeah.
So we're going back another year. So this is 2021, hence more mass.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is heavy.
These are steel, and not just steel. The bottoms of those plants are 1/2-inch plates.
Yeah.
I think they weigh at least 300 or 400 pounds each. Like, I mean, carrying them is insane.
But you still were able to carry them. I mean, we put them very close to the road so you could unload them. Easily, but even then, they're still manipulable. They're just really. So what happened to these ones?
So these ones all got resighted. So this was a big deal. There were a couple things that were our goals here. Like we wanted to really connect to. We really wanted to make something that would find a home, and so that was like imperative number 1. 2, this was like as we were coming out of COVID, this idea of emerging, right, and like. How are we stepping back into kind of the space with other designers, right, other people? And so there was this metaphor of the growth of the plants and the idea that we were all growing to emerge back into the sunlight, right? And the plants we actually, they were all started by our staff. They were actually started down in Portland. We have a green on our staff down in Portland. And they started all the baby starts for us. And then we had someone that was doing CA down on a project down there. So they would bring up a carload of plants every week.
Oh, wow.
We were like, because we actually grew them all from seeds. Which I know that many people knew when we were doing this one. And there was like a multitude. That was our grower right there in the center, right? And part of the importance of this being grown from a seed, like seeing it foster, was something our community was supporting. And then when we were there, we wanted people to be able to engage in the idea of like leaving a story behind. So like on the grow wires, there's all these spots to tie a tag and essentially like say, what are you excited to emerge from, right? Or what did you learn through COVID that you want to take forward into the rest of your life? And so, I mean, I still have all these little messages, and they were some of them quite heartfelt, right? That like little kids did and adults did, right? This idea of like writing something down and setting it free. So, yeah.
Yeah, this one turned out really good. Yeah, it was definitely in that weird balance year where everybody's trying to do things that brought people together, but we still didn't want stuff.
Exactly.
A lot of ones are designed so stuff isn't touchable. Or, like it was an interesting year.
It was like touch it in a way that like nobody else necessarily had to touch it behind you. Like you could keep like, space between you or enough distance. And that was like the long-term arc of them. And each one of these, so we ended up making, gosh, I think there were like 12 of these different high planters. And so some of them we contacted a pea patches. So some of them went to pea patches in the South. Some of them went to school. So Mahlum does a lot of K-12 schools.
Yeah.
12. And so some of them are actually at some of our schools.
Oh, wow.
We dropped them all throughout the city so that different people could use them. So, yeah.
Because it's just the raw steel, right? They weren't coated. Yeah.
They weren't coated. Yeah. And this is another piece of like, what do you assemble before you get to like, they are designed for assembly, which I think is long term when you think about like, what can you do in the shop versus what has to be built in the field. And so while the folded plinth on the bottom was done all in the shop, the uprights we installed kind of once we sited it and added the cables in on the site. So it is kind of like how much gets assembled there versus later. Yeah.
A little more transportable.
And then we had started transferring our seedling plants throughout, like we had been they'd started mostly as seedlings, and then we transferred a lot of them on site when we were there. And then
some of the
bigger ones we had to pre-pot.
I was going to say, I thought maybe.
Yeah, they were growing faster than we'd anticipated, which was great. But then we were trying to, and this is another, we tend to like many things in our office. Like we want to have multiples of them. And so then we're like, what do you do with all these plants?
Yeah, you can't just have 3.
Yeah, we had a couple people's backyards like full of plants, right? Like, we were like, the whole staff was like, okay, who's watering the plants? We had a whole section of our conference room that was dedicated to plants. Like, yeah.
Well, that's the end of that year. And then we go back one more year, which I just shared this with another team as well as an example of a successful one that had reedy objects that did not break.
Which is
like, this is an installation built for abuse, and it like held up really well.
And mostly didn't smack people. So these are soccer agility poles, right? So we had this great vision of wanting to, but this was balance, right? Is this balance? Yeah. We had this vision where we wanted to be able to like move through something and have everything essentially return to balance. Yeah, it is balance. So like return to static. And so we kept going through, okay, is it like wood dowels, right? Like what is it that actually has the flexibility to move and yet come back? And also, again, the many things, right? We can't just have a handful of them because at first we were like, is it a frame that's like ribbons that you're moving through, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of didn't want to have a top on it. And then I don't recall whose brilliant idea it was to use soccer agility poles.
It was great.
But it totally worked. And
even the fact that they get stacked, like it has a nice,
Yeah, and I think you're normally only supposed to stack them too high, but and this is like, right, I remember being like, we originally didn't want a platform. We just wanted it all to be in the ground, but festival has rules, and I
think this is the first year we were in that park too, and everybody was like, "Oh, grass, no more bricks," and it's like, well, it's still the same problem.
Yeah. And it was like, I remember emailing you and being like, okay, so we want to just put them in the ground, and you were like, no holes in the ground. And I mean,
it's so we're finding ways to get around that, but there's too many parks people there who like, are afraid we're going to hurt their irrigation system.
I think, and so that was like, that's essentially how we ended up with these platforms, right?
Yeah.
And it's always been really important for us to be able to move through our installs in an accessible way. So you kind of see the platform has an amoeba out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it is wide enough that you could get a wheelchair or like
Mm-hmm.
a stroller into that and turn around.
Get an equitable experience. Yeah.
Exactly. Like you might not be like on a platform or in the middle, but you would be surrounded by the green dot. So I think that's something that's always a gut check that we, every stage of the process, we're like, okay, what is it like if I'm pushing a stroller? What's it like if I'm experiencing this with low mobility? Like, what are the different ways people might experience it, right? What if I'm little? What if I'm big, right? What if I'm
we just did the acceptance emails, and I feel like half of the ones I wrote were with that in mind, because someone was like, well, the entire experience is predicated on like going up these steps. It's like, well, what if I can't go up the steps? How do I experience it? And it doesn't mean I need to be up the steps, but I need to get that experience. This one does that well. Like you still feel like you're inside it. You still,
It kind of gives you that framing of like, okay, well, how many different ways in which could I experience, which I think works really well, right? You can see here this little kid, like how are they moving through it versus the adults that are on the other side. And even like the what is it like to photograph yourself? I mean, we also use like what's it like to selfie in this, right? And this one, a good selfie one. Some better than others, but kind of what does that feel like? And we were pleasantly surprised with the way this one turned out.
Yeah, I think the base helps it too, because it makes it feel a little more cohesive. Versus the polls on. I mean, the polls on their own probably would be its own interest. Oh, it's Nicole.
I wish we were to like decommission the polls and bring them, like just essentially donate them to a soccer club. Although I think this one went to Bumbershoot. So I
didn't pull those photos, and I don't recall. Bumbershoot got weird where we had a bunch of those installs there, but then Bumbershoot, this was the final year before Bumbershoot kind of went through its rebirth here. And they didn't have enough folks to kind of docent each of these installations, and I think a few of them just kind of they were like to look at. So this one, I think this one was just there, and people were, it survived fine with all the kids at Bumbershoot. It was a very like teenager Bumbershoot year.
It depends on the lineup. Well, and so this is the one where I'm like, I have no idea like what happened after that, but it was pleasantly fun. And this one I think also benefited from being right on the edge of the water too, which was like it was a good little corner.
It's a fun spot to be there. Yeah, I'm surprised more people don't try and claim that area. It's a long ways away from where you load and unload.
It does want to be like light enough to, and this was actually pretty, I mean, again, going back to, we built the bottom base. I forgot. I think this is Anderson this year. They built the base for us.
It must have been site assembled somewhat because it's so big, right?
Yeah. Well, and we did all the, I think there's two pieces to it. I think it clicked together in two spots.
Okay,
is what I think it did. Yeah.
And
then originally, like the limey circle on the bottom was kind of an accident, because originally we thought these were going to have a nice wood edge, and then we just our contractor partner was like, this is not so constructible to have this beautiful
have a flush
edge. And so we were like, and so then they ended up, I think it is actually gyp that was scored and bent.
And they bent. I wouldn't even think. Wow.
Yeah, so I think
plastic or something. Man, gyp.
Yeah,
gypsum board. Yeah.
And I think this is maybe another ethos we've always tried to hold to. Like, this is the collaborative effort between us and our partners, right? So we try to invite whoever we're working with, because we switch it up most years and work with new friends, and try to say, okay, if this is our goal, like, let's invite them early. They're part of our ideation usually, as much as they want to be. And then we get into, okay, we're in design build mode. This is the intent. What are you seeing? What's not working? And then how do we pivot to hold the idea with some flexibility around either what they've got in stock, right? Because a lot of times they're donating time and support, right? Materials. and other times it's like, okay, what is feasible, right?
Yeah. Well, you've had a contractor every year, right? You've found a partner. So
Yeah.
does that relationship, is it set up where it's like, hey, look, we'll cover X amount, and we're looking to you maybe to find some materials or source materials for it? Like, how does that relationship
Depends
work?
on it depends on the year, right? So there's usually some amount of like this year's a great example. We bought, like, we as in Mahlum bought all the soccer agility poles. Right, so I mean it's probably like a couple $1,000s worth of poles.
At least, yeah.
Yeah, and then our contractor partner donated all the materials and the time to make the base for it. So there's usually a lot of partnerships like that. Like the year we did the big giant steel things, we had just finished a middle school with Shoreline, and the contractor on that one was Hoffman. They had been the contractor. We had all the steel in the project, so they went to the steel partner. They all donated all that steel, right?
Yeah.
We bought all the planters, or we bought all the.
It's definitely the offcuts. It wasn't new stuff.
Oh, there was some new stuff in there, but right then they were like, "Well, we got this in stock. We don't have this." That has been complete, though. I blame on my friends at CPL. Thanks, Corey.
Because they really wanted it.
Well, they were really worried about someone standing on it and
racking,
right? I mean, so this goes back to like, they help us to know that we're being safe, right?
Well, to that effect, it means it really is something you can count on to have a longer life, because you're confident in it, versus something was built for 2 days and it's like sort of in-house. It's like you could let it go somewhere, but then you're always in the back of your head worried about like that wasn't built to like kind of the standard of like architecture, or
totally. So, and we've been ambitious and more than once on the scale of our installs that has resulted in wanting to like, okay, like this is probably our most least reinforced base that we had done, because we were like putting very little weight on top of it. So.
All right, this one now we're into beefy territory. So a preamble for this one before you explain what it is. The festival this year, I believe this is the year. The year before was the year we tried to do installations around the city. This year we had an ongoing relationship with Downtown Seattle Association. And we tried to find, I think we had like 3 installations that were going to just live in the park, but we picked them in advance versus during the festival, folks get asked to stay on. This is more ahead of time. We're like, you get a special location and a special size, because we used to have real size restrictions.
Yeah, like a really, really restrictive 10 by 10.
It was 10 by 10, and people still design to that, which I think is still probably great size for most people. But it's now it's funny because everybody comes to us like, well, how small does it need to be? It's like, you could submit anything, and we would probably find a way to make it fit.
But they get
right now
of the 10 by 10, right? I mean, in this one, I was even like, you can build in a 10 by 20, and so this thing is exactly 10 by 20. By 20.
Well, because even then, I mean, it's less about the space anymore, as it's about what you can handle. And it's like, the bigger it gets, the more grandiose or expensive, even when you're doing for a real low budget kind of thing, just the bigger it is, the more it's going to cost, as much as the rendering looks cool. But go ahead and explain this installation. I'll see if I can't find a wide shot.
Which festival? Which year was this one?
This is 2017. This is the last block party in Occidental Park before they started doing the remodeling of the park down there. So this would have been no, this is the year. Hang on, I've got the festival archive here. This is Trust. Oh, so this is Trust about climbing. Yep,
and that's why I remember. Okay, so when we first conceived of this one, I think that what we submitted was like, we found a pair of like fishnet tights, and we like stretched it out over a mirror, because we were basically like, we want you to walk across this net over a mirror that was reflecting back at the sky below you, right? That was conceptually
to
what
feel really hot.
That was what our goal was. But this idea that you were kind of like free flowing over this net, and kind of how you were experiencing the space around you, and then slowly but surely we needed an armature to hold our net this experience. And so this is where you start to see the mirrored, I think it was mirrored plexi. It's what you're seeing to the right? This idea that the space is reflecting around you. And what you can't see underneath the net is that it's mirrored on the bottom, right?
Yeah.
And so you move up, you kind of climb up this arced piece that you were just seeing, and then you float above. There's like kind of a flat point on top. And this is, where they're sitting in it right now. And then you could actually move underneath it. So this is all in the effort of like, how can you create different ways that you experience it so you can kind of crawl up it, you can sit on it, and you can kind of move underneath it in order to kind of experiencing it from multiple different perspectives. And you can kind of peek in through these little clear acrylic plexi sides to kind of see what's inside of it. And so they're so tall because we were worried about it being open when yeah. And we actually had doors on it. We would go close the doors at the end of the day.
Yeah, you had special design parameters this year compared to some years where, because this was going to live in the park beyond the event, which meant you weren't, unlike the event where everybody's got to be there to kind of stop, like you say, it's somebody climbing over the top. We didn't have that when it was going to just be down there on an average Tuesday.
So we had these big doors that we would try and shut it at night and padlock it. And it worked. I mean, we never caught anyone in there when we came. We would unlock it at like 8 a.m. and lock it back up at like 7 or something. Because our office was just around the corner at the time. But yeah. So
yeah. And single color here too works pretty well. That yellow.
Yeah. I think that's something that we found. Like you can see it in this one and the last one. This idea of, well, and in many of these, like, how do you use natural material and color in a very striking way? And so the yellow from this one actually came from the fact that we ended up with donated yellow webbing, right? And so that kind of set the whole tone of it, because the webbing was, and it's this, this is boat webbing, like that they make for nets in a boat. And like, I think that how this happened is Anne Schaff was kind of like, there was this Susan Jones house that used webbing on the side of the guardrail, and I'm pretty sure that was like a local vet. So we dug through, found who that was, reached out to them, and then they custom fabricated this webbing for us, and they donated it. They were super great.
Oh wow! So it wasn't just an off.
Yeah, this one wasn't an off. They were kind of like, well, what color do you want, and how big do you want it? And then we had to source all like what? And then we had to source all the bolts, right? And so this is then kind of how much. Trying to find the right bolt and the right O-rings that would click through. So Mahlum ended up procuring those. We got the webbing donated. And this one I think was built by B&B Builders. And the yellow on the outside was trying to then say, what's this striking color outside, right? Like the inside of all the colors, the web, right? And then outside it's this big yellow box.
Yeah, it really punched out well. And then all the portals and things. I mean, you can see people catching onto the mirrors here and there in the photos.
And people would just like chill, and the kids loved this thing. Right. And I think that's this idea of like how are there different ways of playing with the object, right? And so you would get the kids that would just go sit and text on top or take a selfie, right, and chill with their friends. And then you'd get these kids that, I mean, look how dirty that thing got.
Yeah.
This was 2 days, right? Because
running up and down it,
down it. And we were like super worried about like the edge they're sitting on.
Yeah, I don't remember. Yeah, there wasn't nothing ever really caught or anything. It was all held up pretty well.
Yeah.
I don't think I have any pictures from after the event. I think it's just all.
Yeah. And it was it was pretty durable. I would say, the one thing that when it did rain, the bottom of the like we would try and clean out.
Oh, the mirror, yeah.
And so there's a couple that we had this like Swiffer that we would try to clean it up with. Maybe was an imperfect perfection. So once you kind of make him, you just have to let him go a little bit.
Yeah, right. Yeah, once it's like. It's also with this talking about the safety or pulling. Like the first time somebody really rams into it or jumps on it is the first and then when she just like, okay, well, it's working fine. Like you relax.
Well, and the amount of sand that is in the bottom of it. So there's a bottom between the plexi. Yeah, to keep it from racking and then tilting. And this
I
is
do
where,
remember that. Yeah.
and like our engineer was like, put this much weight. They were very specific on the weight. So I'm out there while they're building it being like, that doesn't look like that many pounds of sandbags, right? And
Yeah.
following our structural being like, how is this many bags okay? Because
It's funny because it's pretty. I mean, I guess it's taller than it is wide.
Yeah.
But it's pretty wide.
I mean, it's pretty stable. And this is
I think it would take people really racking, but of course that's what they're engineering for, is like true of you.
Well, that's what the engineer was like. Yeah, it'll be okay. It'll be okay, because I mean they're going 10 times above and beyond what my weight is. Yeah. So.
Yeah,
But it was even fun. Like, had lots of nice little intimate moments like that where you could peek through and peek around.
I like all those little windows. Which, when we go to this next year, that's also a fun thing about that one. But yeah, those little peek throughs. I wish I had better shots. I noticed all these like, oh, I focused on the wood, and then you get a blurry bird. In hindsight,
it's like you don't realize how much when you're inside of it, how much it focused your attention upward to, and like. Yeah. Because the mirrors were kind of like the two sides and up, like it was a big U shape that was mirrored, and the sides were the wood, right? And so it was this kind of, you were in this infinite green, like you can kind of see it beyond here, which did work well. This blurring of start and stop for it. So yeah, back there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that worked really well. Mm-hmm. Well, so speaking of that, let's go to the this is the final one we have here. Is this year, which I think also did a really good job of framing.
Yeah. Well, and this one we're ambitiously heavy in all of ours.
So this is power is this year.
And this is in this power one.
Do you remember what the idea was behind the?
I'm trying to go back. There was, I will say this might not have been the deepest connection to the theme that we had. We were using power loosely when we were.
I think everybody was that year because it was so obvious you could go one direction, and like we were all trying to avoid kind of doing the obvious one.
And so, we were doing this. This was in partnership with Walsh Construction, and we had just finished, we were doing these little CLT modular, like classroom editions. Like they were just like little tiny portables, but made out of CLT. So they were like, hey, look, we've got some offcuts. Like we could make something out of that. And we were like, okay, that would be cool. And so that is essentially where this offer of materiality started this question. Okay, how do we use this powerful material? See,
I do recall this the way this
you were like, I don't believe it. But it was a very engaging experience, and like part of it was this, like we wanted something super simple and super striking, and so there was this idea of, okay, we embrace the idea of the 10, but this is where we embrace the 10 by 10 by 10. We're like, we're gonna max out our 10 by 10 by 10 by 10. And make something that perfectly fits in it with these CLT offcuts. So all of them were cut in Walsh's shop from the offcuts in order, and essentially to like slot them together, because we wanted to attach them all without using fasteners. So they're actually all slotted into each other, like, so it's just the material.
It's like a CNC piece of furniture,
exactly. Like, which was so it was kind of a bit of a jigsaw to put together, right? So we had all these pieces, we cut them all apart, and then we were like, okay, we're gonna magically, like, it's all gonna come together in the field. And so there's maybe like 15 or 20 of us working to assemble these pieces because they were so big and massive, right? And we weren't allowed to have any like cherry pickers. We weren't allowed to have crane, right? Like we had to be all based on people power and assembling it on site. So
I think they had some sort of like hand crank thing or something, if I remember, to like sort of help lift.
That kind of helped tilt. And then we'd have like people holding these panels up, just being like, please let this work. As we hold it all. And so that was kind of how the framing of it came together, which I think just reiterates this: what do you do before, what do you do in assembly to actually bring it all together piece. And then this goes back to that striking and playful piece. At one point we wanted to create this black box, essentially because it's a Shoshiguru bond on the outside. It's like a charred black box for the outside piece, and then inside would be this finished wood face. And then we, I don't quite remember where the Light Bright first started in bringing that forward, but essentially it's like a giant adult size Light Bright with these
colors. There were 2 of this year, ironically.
Yeah, and that's why I was like, oh, and even our group internally had started to go. I was like, wait, we made a Light Bright already.
Well, we I think we put you side by side. I think we didn't know. One of you added it. It may have been DLR, but like it was sort of after the fact. By the time we got closer, it's like, oh, these are going to be similar in some way. You know, like they've got their thing. Like they're thankfully different enough. It's not really obvious, but it was a funny.
Not saying well, but it does prove to point like how easily you can fall into some of these like tropes of installations.
This year we have lots of mazes, and so tell everybody like, okay, there's a bunch of mazes. It's great. You can do, but like just so you know, a lot of other people did that. Some years it's you can kind of pick it by the theme. I think was it last, and it's not always obvious. Like last year was a bunch of tunnels.
Well, and or like all the ones that were like the threaded string, like
the threaded, that comes through every few years, But this year, Curiosity turned into maze for a lot of people, which I get how you can kind of like, okay, you're discovering things. But it's funny how that works. I think balance year was a lot of teeter-totter proposals initially, and then people pulled back from that.
Start to like branch towards different, but I think that was like this big part of this one was like, you know, this like there's something in like you can see in or you can't. Like, I mean, there was a constant of power of like what's inside and what's outside that we were really exploring. So again, this idea that you can like move around and into the middle, right? All of this again, you can fully experience if you're low mobility or kind of with a stroller. Kind of what's that experience and how can you impact when you're inside pushing out to what's outside, right? And this idea that in and out are pushing on each other was how we were linking it to or using the light, right, as a display of you can interact with those that are inside and outside, and kind of what is that transformative experience to go from one side to the other.
And I mean, it used that material really well. You get to kind of play off having these giant kind of cantilevered. So it worked as a good display.
That, like, super intense, right? I mean, and again, it's all like locked in field together. And you can sit inside. There's like a little bench on the inside, so you actually can sit inside and pull your legs up, and no one would know you were in there. Comparatively to like if you're standing and people can kind of see your feet.
And this one has that skylight, which was we got really lucky with sun that year. In terms of light, there's a bunch of, I guess this day's a little grayer when these photos are taken, but like there were a lot of nice light coming through. Green,
like that green, because we had a big piece of plexi because we wanted this idea of like there's a point where you become washed in light was part of that intent of I think
to go back the other way.
Playing there it is like playing with perception, and I think how light transforms objects around you. Like you can kind of see that both in the last one with the glass or kind of the reflective surface, and here with you're looking through another color and it's transforming the way in which you see the canopy and almost forcing the wash of the canopy on the sidewalls.
Well, this is the festival was close to September in this era. So this is definitely more autumn colors that the green would shift.
And then, you know, it's quite interesting how frequently people would actually reset the pegs, like, right? You can,
right. People like order.
People do, right? And so they would take them all down and put all of color on one side or another.
Yeah, you're right. These are all order.
Like human, and this goes back to human nature. It's fascinating, right? Or people that would push them the exact same amount through, right? So it is this like. It's the festival in some ways is totally it's fascinating, like human psyche of like, what do we do when we have a giant object to play with?
Right. I mean, that's having done it a bunch, right? You start to really realize all these sort of things, but then it's also, so I've done other events and like other events will be different. You know, it's like each event has its own sort of ground rules, the way people interact with things, and you'll put the same installation at a different spot. and you kind of think you know what's going to happen. It's like, we've done this before. Here's what people are doing. Here's how people were abusing it. Here's what we need to sort of watch out for. And then something else entirely happens, and like they're off doing what, it's strange.
I think it is just like, it's super illuminating, right? And I think this is something because I've been drifting back from as deeply in the making of the objects as I had been in the past, right? To support our staff really finding, what do you want to make, right? And I think, like, I continually remind them, right, what is an act of engagement that is intuitive, right? Sometimes in these installs we get a little too, I don't know that esoteric is the right word, because we got a little architecty or designer, and we assign a lot of meaning to some of these things. And when people are experiencing them, a lot of times they gravitate to, I can push this, I can pull this. What is that simple, right? These tell you, oh, they're already all not in the same spot. I can push or pull on them. And people just go up to it and start doing it without being told what to do.
Yeah. And I think we get resistant to the really simple thing. It's like, oh, well, that's too baby. Like, it's like, look, people will go deep into things that are simple. I mean, our own installation we just went through, there's a new person on our team this year, and she came up with a great idea, but was very kind of like as if it were this conference for, postdoc candidates really diving deep. And it's like, look, there's going to be 5-year-olds using this. And it's like, if we design for them, I promise you the people who are the postdocs will get all the like deep thinking about it. But it's like, we don't have to necessarily worry about kind of these long, hyper complicated connections. It's like, it could just be like left or right, or whatever.
It can just be right. I think, if anyone takes anything away from this wandering of Stacey's conversation, right?
One sec, you cut out.
Oh, I was gonna say, if anyone takes anything.
Try again.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, there we go. Yes.
Okay.
That might have been my headset. I don't know, but
we'll blame the internet, because the internet is rough in my corner of the world. But I think, if anyone takes anything away from like my ramblings, it is this idea of simple and playful, right? It's okay, right? It can be a beautiful object that is fun, and that has a weight and power to it that I think sometimes we forget about when we are caught in the making of it and the thinking about it. Because when you watch people on these, right, like you see the joy in their face, right? Like, there's this one photo that I think Tao had taken of the Light Bright, and it's this woman
she's just that gets used all the time. Yes.
But you can like see the excitement in her face, right? Or like even this little kid, right? The curiosity of climbing up the thing, right? It has
if we go all the way back here to the last year, like people. Simple, but people got into doing the thing.
Totally. They were like into it, and then they would start to roll their own and throw them, and I was like, great, because I can't keep up with you, so you start rolling, right? So
it's like the old, like the most sustainable building is the one people care about. It's sort of the same. It was like the best installation here is not necessarily, it's the one people engage with the most, and they'll give you. I mean, you have a idea behind it, but they can give you a lot to it as well.
Exactly. Like, what is the experience that they take away, right? And in some ways, right, and I think about this is why I care so deeply about the festival, right, is we want to connect the community in our city to the fact that we make things, and they too can make awesome things, right? Like this idea that like it's not just it doesn't have to be an esoteric designer thing, but everyone can kind of bring forward this idea of connecting to and making objects in their city, and that they have a voice in that, right? So I think that's like things sometimes we forget when we get.
It's not a white box you're not allowed in, or it's something you can be part of.
Yeah, it's like letting go of the preciousness. We sometimes get caught in preciousness, and so it is this like, okay, it's precious until the day we cut the ribbon, and like everybody's going to do all sorts of weird, right? And they're going to do things
and they're going to use it exactly in the way you never thought of.
Totally.
And you have to be open to that. I mean, if there's really a truly like, no, if they use it in this way, it completely breaks the concept or something, then that's a design challenge of like, okay, well, you got to do it in a way that they wouldn't want to do it, but you got to accept that they're going to do, something else entirely.
Exactly. It's something you never even thought about, right? Or
Like here, I mean, the thing you don't want them to do is climb, and it's like, okay, well, all these elements do not, like let you like that.
right.
That feels
The way of the
very
string.
off
Yeah.
limits. Yeah,
And this one was also super interesting. So, right, even this like that older gentleman, right? He's putting his little story on there, right? Like we gave away all the plants too. Like we kept some of the big
Yeah.
planters for when we rehoused them, but we had a ton of extra ones that like we offered up to people. And people came back to take them the next day, or like this idea of we had all these seedlings that we didn't quite have anywhere for them to go, and so people were like, "I can really take one," and we were like, "Yeah." I have no idea what I'm going to do with it. Yeah.
And then MBVJ saw that, and this year they were right next to you. They had, let's see, there you go. They had their whole plant thing right behind.
Yeah, so I think it is interesting how you see little like bits of these installs that inform each other over time, right? Because we can't not being influenced by each other. Like, I would say we were super excited about the who was it? Who did the big net one with the CLT around the edges?
HOK and Arup,
right?
and
like, like when we saw that one, we were like, "Dang it, that was like our perceived edges." Like our
just like go for it, right?
Totally went for it, which I love. Right? So
I mean, there's costs to that, of course. That's the tough thing when you're like, one of the community groups or an individual or a student's, submitting. It's like, I want to do that. It's like, great, but that's got this full weight of like multinational groups, and like there's a lot of stuff going on there.
and we recognize we're super lucky, right? In that with Mahlum, right? We have contractor partners that are excited to partner with us and co-build with us, right? We are excited that it's something our organizational leaders invest in. So, right, they're like, we want to support time to do this, and we have some money to support like putting together the install, right? So, and it's not that we get $1 million to do these things, right? But it is like a very intentional. We want to support our teams to create something that they can create, right? Something that always excites us.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the plus of the block party itself, is there can be things that are lo-fi or lower budget next to these things that have a lot of sort of institutional support or whatever, and they still can work, and they're always, speaking of influence, I mean, here's a couple of years before. I guess I need to stop sharing and share a different one. Is the pseudo influence for and there's lessons learned from this, that like these poles broke at times, and they got abused in certain ways, and the height's a bit much for folks to trip out of, but you see these kind of things cycle through as people kind of see things and iterate upon them, or
and that's always like totally one of my favorite installs of all time is the ice one, right? That
the ice cube, everybody, still.
I mean, it's like so simple, right? It's like one material that radically transforms over the weekend is so simple, and yet the amount of people that could not touch that thing, right? When you think about it, you're like, this thing's probably gross. It's a good thing.
And speaking of unexpected, Clay was saying that, he goes, that was sort of the thing we were not planning at all, was this kind of idea that people would really kind of burn their hands into it.
And there was a part where people kept putting their faces into it, which I was like, watch them, right? Because we were right across from it, and like everybody would just put their face in the same spot, and I was like, oh, this is before COVID, for sure.
Yeah, and that goes to like simple, right? I mean, like there's not, there's a lot of thinking behind what that one was and what it meant and all that, but like in the end, it it can be engaged as it's just a block of ice. It's like it's as that simple. I was trying to pull up one from a few years ago that was the the marshmallows and the spaghetti one, which I always like putting up as my fave because it's so like off the shelf. I think we were presenting one year, and it was some team presented like a $20,000 installation, and then this team came and was like, well, we have spaghettis and marshmallow, and everybody's like, yeah.
The amount of time, because we were near spaghettis and marshmallows, and one of our staff's kids, he's been growing through the festival. Spent so much time at the spaghettis and marshmallow thing, and I was like, I just made you a giant object to play with, and you're putting, and I was like, awesome, right? Because people were super excited about it, right? And that goes back to what's tactile, what
Oh,
is like,
this was that same year. Yeah, this was the Ice Cube year.
I mean, and that's like, it's so simple, but like, it's very like connected, right? It's that I can impact this and I can co-build. I think that idea of co-creating on it
Yeah.
is super. Oh, I loved this one too.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes the teams get in their heads a little bit about like, oh, okay, there's this other one, they're doing this grandiose thing, or it's like, do the thing you can do in a really cool way. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to, yeah, this was the string year.
Yeah, one of the first years. Yeah, this was actually like one of the first strings, I think.
Yeah, I think, this was the lead off, and we've seen iterations of this idea throughout. Yeah, sorry, now we're just looking at.
Yeah, I mean, we've played this game for so long, or not played this game, but like been part of this institution, like this experience, right?
Right. Yeah.
You see these threads come forward, right? And whether or not a team saw that other install or not doesn't really matter, right? Because it is this like hooking in on this, like what engages people in connection, right? What fosters, right? Part of the steps here are like, oh, you can sit down, you can sit on this, right? That's why they have objects there to say you can sit here. Right.
Yeah, and I think there's elements to all these that are inspirational. It's like, okay, well, they did this, and like, I like the way this works, or it gives you ideas for future. With everything, like, I like all the different installs. It's pretty rare there's one that's like, I'm not a fan of at all. They're always this IDSA had a thing this year as well too.
Like, there's always something, I think, that draws people to these installs, right? And install is going to draw a different person to it, which I think is what is also cool. And kind of like, and as someone who goes to the festival every year and spends the majority of the 2 days there, like how much these change during the events. Like, and your comment about the boat one earlier, I loved the boat year because seeing it fill the water,
fill the pond,
was super cool, right? And so that is an experience that we have as legacy members to kind of watch it.
And that's another one that was a team that's been around since the beginning, like, or at least people from that group have been around, like, there's sort of a cross. You can see the people who've done it. That's why we're doing this video series, right? People who've done this multiple times or more than once have some understanding of like, well, here, look, we've done this, and now this is what worked, and like, here's how you can evolve this going forward, or so speaking of that, do you have additional advice? I mean, we get up on a bunch, but for folks that
we've hit on a lot of it. I mean, I would say, like, it's apropos this year's curiosity, but I think that these are really the successful ones that I see people engage in do have a root of curiosity for people that is inherently, it's not that you know what you have to do, it's that the object invites you to do something, right? And you might not be doing what is quote unquote the right thing that the group asks you to do, but it is inviting you to like push, to climb, to sit, right? To read, right? Is like, how can you prompt the object to draw you in, right? In a striking way. And the second part of that is to keep it simple. So not try to do too many things. Like, I think we had 8 other versions of this that had like layers that would have multiple kinds of streamers, right? And so then it was like, no. One kind of streamer, you could have multiple.
Real complex,
right? Like, just make it simple, because simple is easy to play with, right? And I think we forget sometimes how important play is, and that is something that we always go back. Like, no matter what the theme is, can I play with this as an object? Hold, and what does that invite?
If you got instructions, instructions are fine, but one line is probably all you want. You gotta, it's this, then this, but also this, and maybe, well, then it's you've
already lost someone from actually doing something. So it is this, like, how simple of an invitation to play with this object can you make, right? And sometimes it's just handing someone a streamer and seeing this, they're like, I know what to do next, right? Like, versus kind of complicating it beyond that.
And that doesn't mean being like, you have to put yourself out there to talk. Like some of this is carnival barking in some way. Like there's a there's a like, wouldn't you like to be?
Yeah, like being comfortable, right? I think this is our planter year, right? Like some people left stories, some people didn't, right? And those are some people just read, some people like smelled the flowers, right?
Yeah.
So I think it is like inviting, like letting the install be the invitation, and then be comfortable wherever anyone chooses to engage in it.
For sure. All right. Well, any other things? I think we're almost at an hour.
I mean, is there anything else you want me to pick on? I mean, I've been around.
I think we got plenty. We'll probably do what we're gonna do some other one here where we have just the whole old crew together.
Perfect.
Go through the living history of everything. We're definitely doing one with Jeremy and I and John Gentry of like the original how this started, which is not where anybody thinks it did, but
and there's very few. I mean, like, and I've been around since like Design in Hell. I think I'm missing like 2 festivals because I was here till that year, but it is
true.
It's like
even now, I mean, it's Bray and myself are probably the only 2 been in touched every festival,
continuously involved, right? And so I do think I think that's like maybe the one other piece that I would encourage of people, right? Like making something for the festival, you are part of a long legacy, right? You are part of an engaged community that cares, right? And you're not alone in wanting to make an impact on your city. And so I think for me, it was like, this is how I found my Seattle tribe, right? Was the festival.
True.
And finding this space for me was the way that I found that it connected me to the city. So,
and other design motivated people. I mean, I guess I got involved and Jeremy got, it was like, wanting to meet other folks other than just architects or other than just building community. It was sort of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then, we got involved because we wanted to change things anyway. And I think that's the same deal. And I was like, people should get involved if they want, even with this event or anything, like you want it to kind of evolve. Get involved and make it happen.
I always say it, like, I think the way I always refer to it is like, nobody is going to make the community that I want to be a part of unless I participate in that process, right? So like if I'm just going to sit back and be like, there's no design community in Seattle, right?
Yes.
It's also on me for not helping to foster it. So that's part of why
I mean, that's literally where we were. We're moping, complaining, like, well, it just wasn't like being in school where there's, you can walk in the hallway, people doing cool stuff all the time. And it's like, well, why? Yeah, it's be the change type of thing. And like, we just went out and kind of like, well, we're going to get involved with this and then run with it and like continue to kind of push. That's sort of the passion behind it, I think, for all of us. So, excellent. I ran out of steam there. I think we've hit everything unless you have any parting words.
I got for you.
At the end of each show, I've normally been calling out the call for proposals, but that's over with. So anybody watching, please check out cdesignfest.org for the upcoming festival calendar and everything else as we begin to announce it. Anybody who's proposing stuff, please check your emails. or reach out via the website. So, Stacey, thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciated sharing and reminiscing. So.
Yes, no problem. Hang on there for a sec. We're going to do an outro and I'll chat.
Sounds good.